Hey guys, so today I'm going to be talking about Severance, which is a show I finally got around to watching a couple of weeks ago. I've been meaning to watch it for a while, and then when they announced season 2, I was like, I'll finally actually watch Severance. And so I now have so many thoughts, so many things to cover. I love this show, I think it is fantastic. More people need to watch it. But what I want to do in this video isn't just do commentary or analysis on the show as a whole or talk about the theories of the show, because I think that has been done by a lot of people. There are a lot of great videos about those things. So today I would prefer to really look at the moral and ethical questions and implications of the severance procedure and really dig into whether we can consider this moral or ethical, which I already don't think we can. But yeah, I would just like to look at those questions further. I have more questions that I will not answer in this. But in general, I would just like to, analyse that concept more and the idea of severance without the more like thriller and mystery aspects that the show creates, because obviously for it to be an interesting series there is the mystery of Lumen Industries as a whole and all of those things. So I don't want to look at Severance in that context either. I just want to look at the severance procedure and the ethics and morals of that choice, and whether, if even without the terrifying aspects that the show covers because of Lumen Industries clearly being quite corrupt, whether the idea itself is wrong or not. So I think the most obvious place to start is to explain what severance is. So essentially, the severance procedure is a procedure in which a chip is implanted in employees' brains that separates their work life and their personal life, so that they have no memory of their work life when they're at home or their personal life when they're at work. So essentially your brain is split into two places and will form two different sets of memories and values and ideologies based solely on the different spatial awareness of your physical body. Now this idea is obviously one that we've all probably considered in a lesser extent, of like wishing that your work day was over and it was 5 o'clock already and you could go home. But this show really asks the question of whether that will actually improve your life, whether your personal life is improved by not remembering your work day, and also forces us to consider what happens to our work selves when we don't have a personal life to consider outside of that place. A question that the show poses in regards to severance is, who would choose to have this procedure in the first place? What kind of person would decide that they are willing to forget everything about themselves and their personal life for 8 hours a day? And so in the show, we obviously see our main character, Mark. He is grieving the loss of his dead wife, and because he is struggling to cope with that, he decides to go get a job on the severed floor at Lumen Industries. And so for Mark, he sees it as a reprieve, because for 8 hours a day he doesn't have to remember that he had a wife at all, let alone the fact that she then died. However, this doesn't change the issues that he has in his personal life. We see that then he goes home and he just drinks and he spends most of his time alone. He's clearly very depressed and he cries in his car every morning before going to work. So while he is forgetting about it for 8 hours a day, there is then still the rest of his life where he feels that loss, so it doesn't really solve that problem. There's also the question of whether, just because he doesn't have the memory of those things or the understanding of those feelings when he's at work, he still feels those effects. Like, it's mentioned to him that his eyes look like bloodshot, like he's been crying before he's gone to work, and then at work they still see that. He still feels something emotionally, he just now doesn't know what for. And so this raises the question of whether it truly separates everything, because you can still feel your emotions, it's just you no longer know the source of them, which I don't know whether that is better or worse, because that's just such a strange idea in the first place. There's also the idea that for your inner self who is severed, your work self, that resignation from your job is almost seen as like suicide of that version of yourself. Because if you do not return to work, then you never access that part of your brain anymore, and it's essentially killed off. And that again, I think, raises more ethical and moral questions about whether we can even consider that to be acceptable, because that inner version of yourself doesn't get to decide about resignation, and therefore doesn't get to decide whether its life is ending, I suppose. And that does raise questions around consent, because there's a version of you inside the workplace, and I will talk about that soon in the video, because I do have a lot of questions in regards to consent around the severance procedure. So now that we understand the concept of severance and this idea of splitting your brain essentially in two and having like a dedicated work self and then a dedicated personal self, I want to look at this idea from the side of the corporation, and the show that is Lumen Industries, but in general, the idea that doing this and having a workforce as dedicated in this way because they know nothing else would maximize efficiency. For Lumen, this is seen as necessary to maximizing efficiency, because if these people don't know anything outside of this company, they should, in theory, be the most dedicated and most efficient workforce, because they have nothing else. All of their values, their ideologies, and all of their drive and interests are linked to the work they do, because they have nothing else when they are there. Therefore, for a corporation, that should be seen as very useful in having a functional, efficient workplace. There's also something about Lumen in particular in the show that has like a cult-like religious sense to it. The way they indoctrinate their workforce to wholeheartedly believe in this company even though they don't actually know what work they're doing specifically. Now, in a normal workplace, I don't think you're really like idolizing a CEO in the way that they do with Care in Severance. However, obviously, because these employees don't have outside values or influences, they're going to be easier to indoctrinate with these things. Therefore, they have this cult-like devotion, this almost religious devotion to the company, because again, it is all they know, and the values of the company are forced onto them because it's the only values they hold. In Severance, Lumen has built an entire ideology around the legacy of the company as well, which only furthers this indoctrination. It builds this world for the employees to believe in, because again, they don't have a real tangible world outside of this corporation to believe in the first place. And so I do think ultimately what Severance forces us to question in regards to its functionality using the severance procedure in maximizing efficiency, it forces us to consider how corporations operating under capitalism are willing to push the boundaries of what is considered ethical or moral in the pursuit of economic growth. Because ultimately, they are severing the employees in order to have them be devoted to this company in a way that they will, in theory at least, work harder for them towards whatever goals they are aiming towards, whatever goals they are working towards. And obviously, under capitalism, we know that companies will essentially do anything for economic growth, for profit growth, and the show does pose the question and makes it feel very possible that severance is a good way to maximize efficiency and therefore progress in those ways that are valued under capitalism. My main question in regards to the severance procedure in the show is the question of consent, because everyone who gets the procedure does consent to doing so and is fully aware of what severance means and what it means to have their memories separated in this way, so that they essentially have an inner and outer self based solely on whatever physical space they occupy. So therefore, their outie self, as it is referred to in the show, has consented to severance. However, the innie version hasn't consented, as the only world they know is the workplace already. So this poses the question of whether, just because the outer self has full awareness and consented to the procedure, the inner hasn't. The workplace version of these employees has not consented to being trapped there. But there is the other side of that, which is the same physical body. Therefore, if that one physical body consents to being severed, doesn't that count for both of them? And it's this very strange back and forth of whether you truly can consent to severance, because you don't know how your inner self will ever or has ever felt about being severed. You know, when they first wake up after the severance procedure, these people don't even know their own name when they wake up in their workplace. You know, that version of themselves knows absolutely nothing about themselves, and they are just confused and lost in this corporate setting. So how can they truly consent when they don't even know themselves? This kind of idea then poses the question of whether people can truly consent to being severed, as both versions of themselves have separate episodic and semantic memories, and therefore both act as completely formed people. The inner version of yourself, the innie, the workplace version, is a fully formed person because they develop their own set of memories and values and ideologies, which we'll talk about further later on in this video. And I will also link to a video below from Like Stories of Old about the psychology of severance, because they talk about this at length, about the different episodic and semantic memory effect of the procedure and how that works on a more psychological level. But these two versions of yourself are both fully formed people. They are just fully formed from different influences. Therefore, the question of consent becomes paramount, because just because the outside version of you has consented, the inner version has not and cannot technically consent. And as we see in the show with Hallie, that her inner self does not want to be at work. When she realizes where she is and that she can't leave, that version of herself can't leave, we see that she does not want to be there. She does not consent to being there. But then her outer self, when she attempts to resign, says, no, I consent to being there, I consent to this, and she keeps going to work with no regard or true knowledge of her inner self not consenting to being there. And so we see the two sides of this, that what happens if after your severance procedure, the outer self does still want to go to work and agrees to that, but the inner self who is trapped at work does not want to be there at all. How can we truly say that anyone has consented to being severed when then the inner self is not listened to, because the outer self has decided that they are willing to do it and are willing to be severed? Because ultimately, the version in the workplace is trapped there. They don't experience going to sleep at night, they don't experience anything outside of just working. They are essentially enslaved. In the show, like Mark even says that like because they can't experience sleep when they're there, because that's something you do at home, you have to measure the days essentially by when you feel awake again, when you feel refreshed and more awake and your clothes have changed. That's the only sign of time passing they even have. And so we have to ask, who would consent to being trapped in this position where they are permanently awake? They cannot leave, they have to constantly work, they have no true breaks because they are not in a normal workplace and there's no leaving at 5 o'clock for them. Who would consent to that? Who would consent to not leaving somewhere and being forced to work? That is entrapment and enslaved, and there's entrapment, there's being enslaved. Who would consent to that? Because your outer self has consented to having a work-free life essentially, but your inner self has certainly not consented to being trapped in a workplace permanently because of the way they perceive the world in general. Now I also want to talk about what happens in the workplace and how workplace abuse is able to take place, and because your outer self does not remember it and does not know of it, they will return to work and keep experiencing that potentially because they have no idea that when they are at work, that version of themselves is experiencing workplace abuse or misconduct. The severance procedure means that the outie version does not have any awareness of what happens during the workday. This means they can still return to work the next day over and over again despite experiencing abuse at work because they have no awareness or memory of it at all. On the other hand as well, despite it being heralded as an improvement to your personal life by being severed, it really isn't, because these people, as we see, are lacking any kind of true satisfaction or validation through work because they have no knowledge or understanding of what they've just spent 8 hours of their day doing. So even though it's meant to improve your personal life in theory, it doesn't, because you just have this big empty gap of nothing. So even, we've all been asked by people when you meet them, like, what do you do for work? And these people cannot answer. And it's a simple thing of how that lack of awareness just leaves this big hole in what their life is. And so they lack a certain level of satisfaction every day because they have no memory of their day in the first place. This, I think, causes, as we see, the outer selves to feel quite hollow because there is just this emptiness. And this especially if we go back to the point of the type of person who would go and agree to getting a severance procedure and getting a job on the severed floor, is that it's most likely not people whose personal lives are good anyway and that they want to experience more of their personal life, because if their personal life was good, they would not be so willing to ignore and forget it for most of their day. Now I just want to talk about identity and memory following the severance procedure, which this is more just questions I have. Again, I will link that video that I mentioned before from Like Stories of Old, because they do a really good job of discussing identity and memory and the question of what truly means to be a person when those things are altered or when we have a loss of those things. Because ultimately what severance forces us to consider is, who are we without our memories or knowledge of who we are? At the core of it, like, who are we actually? What is at the core of every person? What values do we hold when we don't know where they've come from, We don't have an origin story to anything. Who are we? Because we generally measure ourselves and our understanding of ourselves is shaped by experience and by our memories. And that's how you form your identity. So without memory, who are you becomes a vital question. How can you form values if you don't know where they came from, if you don't have experiences that form them? Do we even still have core values if we don't know what experiences shaped them in the first place? Are we just an empty shell of nothing if we don't have a memory? If we don't know where things came from in ourselves, do we actually have anything there? Or is it just nothing? Because our memories shape who we are, shape our values, shape our ideologies, shape what we believe. So without that, is there even anything there? Is that still a person? Or is that just a shell, it's a physical body with nothing in it? Because, yeah, the show is constantly making us question, who are we without our memories? Is that really a person? And I don't fully have the answer. I guess they are still a person, because we see the innies, the workplace versions of our characters have full thoughts and opinions and things that they value, and we see them form new memories in the workplace, this very sterile, controlled environment. But there's still gaps in that. They're not fully fleshed out in the same way a person with a full experience of their whole life so far is. Then there's the question of, is base level humanity a result of external understanding, or can this understanding be through internal feeling? Because a lot of our most human tendencies, our most human ideas and thoughts are through our understanding of external things, external influences and experiences. Our external life and circumstances shape our basic humanity, but it's whether this can be done, whether that kind of humanity can be felt without those external feelings, whether it's just internal to being human regardless of experience or memory. And now obviously these are all massive questions that the show poses that I don't truly have answers for. I don't think anyone truly has answers for, but I do find it so interesting to consider. And if we go back to the morals and ethics of that, is there a chance that by undergoing the severance procedure, you are forming a whole version of yourself that doesn't feel truly human because it misses whole sections of being human? It doesn't have memory or an identity to shape itself around. And so how do these people still feel human and still form their own values and ideologies without those external life experiences? And is it truly ethical to take those away, even if it's just for 8 hours a day? So those are some of my thoughts about Severance, about the moral and ethical questions and implications of the severance procedure. I mean, this is only like a small snippet of what I could talk about, but I think these are my most concrete thoughts to go over. But yeah, I have so many questions also just plot-wise about the show. If you have not seen Severance, go and watch it. Do not let yourself be spoiled. That's why I wanted to do a different video for this as well, not my usual kind of breakdown of a full plot. One, because the plot of the show is quite a lot to break down. Also because I think it is best experienced with no understanding of what goes on. But yeah, I'm fascinated by the ethics and morals of the severance procedure and whether we can truly consider this to be an ethical practice. I don't think we can, because of the questions of consent and identity, and also what can happen in a workplace that is unchecked in that way, because you can't resign in the same way as an average job that isn't severed. And I think in general the show acts as a fantastic commentary on corporate power and capitalism, and kind of where we potentially could be headed if corporations are constantly seeking to maximize efficiency and profit in the way that they continue to under our current capitalist societal system. But I also think it forces us on a more human level to ponder the limitations of personal choice and identity, as well as consent. What it truly means to consent to something, whether severance actually allows for true consent. Also, I think pondering, what identity really is, what our ideologies and values truly come from, whether they are a result of experience and memory, or whether they are there within us already, and regardless of whether we know where those things came from, can we still hold those values without knowing their origin? And yeah, I just think there's so many questions to be asked and so many discussions to be had in regards to the broader implications of severance as a concept. But yeah, that's the video. Thank you so much for watching. Yeah, I'm going to keep saying it, everyone needs to watch Severance. I'm so glad I finally got around to watching this show. I thought it was fantastic. I can't wait for season 2. I have so many questions. Obviously, we got left on a massive cliffhanger, and I cannot wait to see where we go with the mystery of the show. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed watching. If you did, please like the video, and if you would like to see more from me, please subscribe. You can also follow me on my social media, Instagram, TikTok, all the usual things will be linked below. I'm also makeup and special effects artist, so you can see that work of mine as well as whatever else I'm working on, and normally you'll get previews of what videos are coming. But yeah, hope you enjoyed that. I hope you watch Severance, love Severance, and really consider truly the ethics and morals of consent and identity, and the ideas around those concepts, because I do think they shape who we are in a very interesting way, and I appreciate that the show forces us to ask these questions. But yeah, that's all. Bye.